Feminism is my religion. I wouldn't know how to think without it.
I came out as a crazy person. I came out as a gay person. My elder sister says, "Oh my God, what's she done now?"
Did you call it patriarchy? Did you call it capitalism? What was the problem?
We just sort of said it was men.
I'm 79 years old.
I have just turned 60.
It pains me to say. How did it happen that I am 73 years old?
And I'm now 67.
Do you want to put the first one on for us, Sheila?
Out of the night.
In the late 1960s, women in Britain and America began to fight for women's liberation. This political struggle resulted in the fastest and most significant transformation in women's lives there has ever been.
Good.
You see, I am woman. I am woman.
Women from very different backgrounds came together in a wave of activism, hoping to put an end to their oppression. Their sense of solidarity and shared purpose lasted a decade.
To go back.
Glad you dropped in. Amazing, isn't it? Look at that. And she did the washing and ironing today for a family of 5.
Can you describe for me what the situation was like for women in America in the 1950s? How constrained were your choices as a woman?
Well, they were totally constrained when it came to anything in the outside world. In those days, jobs were listed by sex, and the only jobs available to women were secretary or clerk, sales clerk or file clerk. And I had a college degree, and I was a very, very bright student. And it made absolutely no difference. Not one of my professors even thought of helping me. They expected me to get married, so I did. I really didn't know what else to do.
Can you tell me how old you were when you were married?
I was 20. And then I had the children when I was 25 and 26.
Were you a good housewife?
Wonderful. I'm very efficient. I'm very neat by nature.
And did you enjoy all that drudgery?
I didn't mind it. What I minded was being limited to it. I was married to a man who was quite ill, I think. A kind of a Jekyll and Hyde. And his furies just became intolerable. But I couldn't leave him. There was no place for me to go. There was no way I could support myself and the children. I was not about to leave the children. So I stayed 17 years. I made up my mind at that moment I would never, never put myself in a position of having a man have control over me ever again as long as I lived. And I never did.
People used to bill and coo, but that don't make it with you, 'cause there's other things we do in our time, baby, in our time, yeah, in our time, baby, in our
It was considered unnatural for a woman to want to have a career. That was considered a manly aspiration. So women thought something was wrong with them for wanting to have meaningful work. And I think that a lot of women resolved it by becoming very insecure, embittered, extremely neurotic, you know, because they couldn't fulfill themselves.
You were 33 in 1968. So how come you weren't already married with a couple of kids?
I think men thought I was a bad bet. I think they knew that I had my own ambitions, and I did want to write books. I couldn't deny that.
But were you under pressure? Was your family expecting you to just settle down?
No, I think they thought that I might be unmarriageable. I resisted feeling like an unnatural woman because I wanted to have a career. But it was something that I think all women then kept very private. They didn't talk about it publicly because they were half convinced that something was wrong, that we shouldn't be thinking these thoughts. We should find our total satisfaction in marriage and motherhood.
In 1969, you were married, you had 2 children, you had a degree. So you kind of achieved everything that a woman was supposed to have achieved by then, probably.
Yes, I suppose so. And like many women at the time, I found this strangely unsatisfying. And that was one of the reasons for the birth of the women's movement then, I think. It is a wonderful thing to have children and to be in the position of, you know, enjoying them and looking after them and so on. But it is, along with that, in this culture goes, or went then certainly, the expectation that you would spend a lot of time cleaning lavatories, cooking meals, looking after husbands, providing a general kind of domestic and caring role for everybody else. And that actually has nothing to do with motherhood as such. And it was this contradiction that I think that a lot of the early women's liberationists in this country were drawing attention to.
The feminists who are here tonight do not believe a woman's place is in the home, right?
Of course not. It's a very oppressive concept. It's
Right.
being used to oppress women and to make them think they're lucky to be slaves.
How many women in the home are slaves?
All women are slaves.
The movement seemed to appear out of nowhere, and I can remember people on the left saying, you know, where did you recruit them?
As Mrs. Panker said, enough's enough. Change her railing, she would do a stuff. Nowadays, a woman out for justice starts the fight for freedom where her bust is.
But when the news got out, even when it was hostile coverage, women were attracted because it somehow struck a chord. And that is the great mystery of history. Why should it be striking a chord when women hear about these groups forming?
We want equality. We want equality. This is no feminine frivolity. We'd like some recognition for our status. We weren't put on this earth to peel potatoes. It's very clear we are.
Tell me about the very first exposure you had to the women's movement.
The very first meeting that I went to was a night where, quite by accident, the subject turned around to the subject of abortion. Every woman spoke, and she spoke from her personal experience. They were all talking about one abortion, and in my usual competitive way, I said, it just came out of me. I said, I've had 3 abortions, illegal, and the most recent one was 6 months ago in Puerto Rico. I had to travel to Puerto Rico, couldn't find anyone in New York. And my best friend Jan is sitting here, and I never told her I went. And then I realized the enormity of what we were all saying, that we all had these private experiences that we would never say aloud to our best friends. And that's what consciousness raising was all about, to find out that collective women's experience and then do something about it.
I oppose male privilege. I oppose the idea that men are superior to women. I don't think men should have privilege of any kind over women. In my life, as I have lived it, as I have seen it around me, it is the women who worry about the children. It is the women who keep the family going. It is the women who have kept the world going while men are off killing each other and a lot of us along the way. I'm sick of it. I've always been sick of it.
Marilyn French's novel, The Women's Room, was the highly autobiographical story of a woman who revolts against the constraints of domesticity. Written in the 1960s, it took many years to find a publisher, but went on to sell 20 million copies worldwide.
I was telling the truth about women's lives in a way it had never been told. Because novels about women do not tell the truth. They don't tell the truth about the place of what housework is in a woman's life. They don't tell the truth about what it feels like to be prey, to be always subordinate. They just don't. And they always focus on men, as though a man is going to save you. No man is going to save you from this.
A woman's lot is to give and give, and go on giving. A woman's got to love and lose, and go on living. Well, I was born a woman, I didn't have no say. Well, I was born a woman.
And their fear was that women would leave their husbands and women would
Well, they
discover their
did.
independence.
A lot of them did. It wasn't just a fear.
So the book really inspired enormous numbers of women to find their own feet.
Yes, it did.
And did those women write to you?
Oh, God, yes. Hundreds and hundreds of letters. Just poured their hearts out, you know, letters 12 and 14 pages long.
It must have felt like you'd unleashed a tidal wave of female anguish.
Yes, I did.
And did you feel proud of that?
No, I felt anguished. I felt their anguish. It was very painful.
How did you account for women's subordination? What was your explanation for why women were oppressed?
We thought it was a mixture of men and capitalism. It seemed to me that if you were going to change women's position, you needed to change the society. I consider the solution to exploitation and oppression to be communism, despite the hollow resonance the word has acquired. It seems to me that the cultural and economic liberation of women is inseparable from the creation of a society in which all people no longer have their lives stolen from them.
Before she was a feminist, Sheila Rowbotham was a socialist. When she joined the women's liberation movement, she brought her left-wing principles with her and always believed that female emancipation would only come about if working-class women were politicised too. Anyone want a signed copy of the female eunuch?
Germaine Greer was born in a bush, so the flyleaf of her book says.
In a bushfire.
In a bushfire. I'm off to a good start.
Germaine Greer shot to fame in both Britain and America when she published The Female Eunuch in 1970. The book argued that women were, as she put it, castrated because they were conditioned to be so completely passive in relation to their own sexuality. Greer encouraged women to rediscover their authentic sexual appetites in order to free themselves as human beings.
I've never seen any definition which refers to women when you come to eunuch. It's always a man who's castrated. It's impossible to castrate a woman, at least as far as the definition is concerned, in a dictionary.
It's only impossible to castrate a woman because it's assumed that she has no sex from the outset, because she's assumed to be a castrated thing from the outset. I mean, I didn't castrate women. Freud did. I mean, he's the first one to talk about the castration complex. I didn't invent that. But I just take issue with Freud on that basic thing. Because I say that just as a bullock doesn't know what it's like to be a bull and doesn't know what he's missing, so women who live in the normal circumstances in our society don't know what it's like to be really female and really human and really in control of all their potential.
What I was really interested in was energy, élan vital, and energy and libido seemed to me to be completely coextensive. The two things go together, desire. To put women in touch with the idea that they had the right to want things and to go and get them. People are always turning on me and saying, why do you want to upset all these young housewives who are happy having their babies and blah, blah, blah. And I have to say, look, I don't want to upset all these happy young housewives. There are thousands upon thousands, millions of other women who are not in the least happy and who are yelling for help.
Were you ever actively involved in the women's liberation movement?
Well, it depends whether I was actively involved in the women's liberation movement. Depends on what you think the women's liberation movement was. I've never been a tremendous fan of marching. Apart from anything else, I used to get quite frightened. And marching strikes me as counterproductive. It's so hard to organise and it's so exhausting. And it gives the powers that be a pretty good view of just how small the operation is. If you can really muster 500,000 people, then march. If you can't, then don't. And we were constantly marching from a position of massive weakness and walking miles too far.
I do like demonstrations. I really like demonstrations. There's a kind of, it's like kind of some sort of old warrior now been called and things. When I get on a demonstration, like, whoa, here we are.
For some of us, collective action is easier. For me, it's very, very difficult.
Why is it difficult for you?
Oh, just because I can't be bothered.
Germaine, that's a lovely name. What does it mean?
Well, it's part of a whole family of names derived from the Latin, which mean from the same seed. That is to say, sister. Mi hermana is my sister. So I'm everybody's sister. How about that?
That's good.
Were you ever a sisterly person, Germaine, or did the whole idea of sisterhood annoy you?
It's difficult, sisterhood. Anyone will tell you that. Relationships between women are bloody difficult. We've spent centuries being pitted against each other, in competition with each other for male attention, whether it's the attention of our fathers or the attention of men in general or whatever. And it's not there. It isn't there. I mean, if I'm standing on the underground train and a man puts his hand between my legs and I say, get your hand out from between my legs, well, the other women go, you bastard. Will they hiss? No. They'll stand there pretending they didn't hear me. That's just crap.
For activists, however, sisterhood was thriving. Not only were women engaging in successful protests and demonstrations, But feminist intellectuals were also looking at how society came to be organised along such sexist lines. Anne Oakley had given up full-time motherhood to become a social scientist.
What was striking, particularly striking to me then, was reading a lot of anthropological studies, how tremendously variable all these definitions of masculinity and femininity are. So the idea that women have to do the housework, men have to go out and go to work because they hunt the animals. This is all huge. It's not just an oversimplification, it's actually a myth.
Oakley's research showed that masculine and feminine attributes were a result of social conditioning. She was the first person to insist that although sex might be determined by biology, gender is not. This was an entirely new concept. OK, so I'm going to ask some really basic questions. What is my sex?
Well, I don't know. You could have changed sex, I need to look at your birth certificate.
Well, OK, what do you think my sex is, Anne?
I think you're probably female.
And what's my gender?
I don't know you well enough to say that.
From the evidence that you are aware of, is anything set by biology other than kind of how our bodies function?
I think very little. 3 political statements point the way to the liberation of housewives. The housewife role must be abolished, the family must be abolished, gender roles must be abolished.
Were you against the family as an institution at that time?
There was quite a bit of suspicion of a family. I had a family in which I wouldn't say my mother and father had been that happy, and I didn't really see that the family was something that I wanted to hang on to. The problem was that we didn't think through was quite how else did you bring up children. If it were admitted that the family is maintained at the expense of women, capitalism would have to devise some other way of getting the work done.
You're my photogenic model from the glossy magazine. In among your kitchen structure, soapy water washing machine.
There was a young lady of Wapping whose life was all cleaning and shopping. Her husband said jokingly, "Try reading Anne Oakley," and she did and left home without stopping.
Did women at that point really transform their sexual lives, do you think?
Yes, I do. I think that women grew to be more assertive sexually and be able to articulate what they wanted. Yeah.
So some of the early imports from America, one was Anne Kurt's paper on the myth of the vaginal orgasm. Did that have any impact on you in your life?
I found it a bit bewildering, actually.
As I understand it, it was a big deal, that paper, because it was saying that the way that people had had sex up to then, where a man would have to have penetrative sex with a woman and expect her to orgasm, this was a kind of a revolutionary document, because it was saying, well, actually it's very hard to achieve orgasm like that, and women's sexuality is more complicated, and most women have clitoral orgasms, and women can have much more rewarding sex lives if this were to be acknowledged. So that seems like quite a big and important thing.
It never had a big impression on me. I never really went along with this clitoral thing. I mean, I think
so you were one of the lucky ones who was already having vaginal orgasms.
I didn't at first have orgasms when I first met somebody, and then when I stopped being so worried about contraception, yeah, I did.
Did that change your life, Anne?
No.
Why not?
Well, why should it? Why should it?
I don't know, it depends what kind of orgasms you were having at the time.
Yes, well, I know you'd like me to talk about that, but I'm not going to.
Did it transform your sexual life, Susan?
No, I'd gotten there already. It was the only kind of orgasm I could have was a clitoral orgasm.
An orgasm, you know, is relatively easy to get. We've made all this fuss and bother about orgasms. We've carried on a treat about orgasms. We've made a whole culture out of the chasse à l'orgasme. It's easy. It's a cinch to have an orgasm. I can give an orgasm to the cat.